Was on its way down when you came in. It's actually slightly... You simply don't think that living standards are going to fall. In fact, you're suggesting that they're rising now and they'll continue to rise. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm confident that we will...
What happens when a politician gets too comfortable? Well, in the case of Rachel Reeves, we got a front row seat to a masterclass in uncomfortable reality. Did she really think Trevor Phillips would let her off the hook, especially live on air? Spoiler alert, he didn't. In fact, he tore through her talking points with surgical precision, and what he said left her completely speechless. Stay tuned, because what happened next is something you won't want to miss. You can almost feel the tension building as Trevor's questions cut through the surface level responses, showing the raw, unfiltered side of politics that often gets swept under the rug.
But I just want to get clear on what you think the problem you're solving is. Has the economy declined, got worse, more difficult since you came to office or not?
The economy is not growing fast enough. I'm not satisfied with the numbers that we see at the moment.
It's not growing at all. The last month was 0.1. Okay, it's gone up and down a bit, but it's basically flat on its back.
And it's not possible within just a few months to reverse more than a decade of economic stagnation. But we are making the changes that's necessary to get Britain building again, to bring money into the economy. The International Investment Summit that we host.
When Trevor Phillips calmly turned to Rachel Reeves and asked her to clarify the so-called 22 billion pound black hole, the entire atmosphere shifted. What started as a straightforward question quickly became a turning point in the interview. As Reeves fumbled through her answers, the tension in the room was palpable. She repeatedly referenced this staggering figure, but she couldn't quite explain where it had come from or how it was supposed to add up. And then the impact hit. Reeves, one of the most powerful economic figures in the UK, suddenly found herself on the back foot. For someone entrusted with the responsibility of steering the nation's finances, her inability to articulate a clear answer left her momentarily stunned. This wasn't just a slip-up, it was a critical moment that exposed a gaping hole in her defense. When the person responsible for overseeing billions can't justify a key figure, the question becomes, how much faith can we really place in those who shape our economic future?
As much as a half. You have no fiscal headroom left. Just how serious is the country's financial situation?
I'm not going to preempt the Office of Budget Responsibilities forecast, but the world has changed. We can all see that before our eyes. And government are not inactive in that. We'll respond to the change and continue to meet our fiscal rules, but we're also shaping the new world, whether that's in the defence and security realm or indeed on the economy. I promised at the general election to bring stability back to the economy. As a result of that stability, interest rates have been cut 3 times since the general election. That's a far cry from the 11% inflation and the interest rate hikes that we saw under the previous government. And that's only been possible because we've put our public finances on a firm footing and we've also put our public services on a firm footing, which is what I did in the budget last year.
This is rather cheerful.
What unfolded over the next 6 minutes was more than just political discomfort. It was a full-blown unraveling of authority. As the pressure mounted, Reeves contradicted herself, dismissed key data that could have undermined her position, and in the end, left viewers with more questions than answers. It wasn't simply a poor performance. It was a revealing one. For those who've long suspected that politicians often wield statistics not as tools for truth, but as shields to deflect scrutiny, this interview was a painful confirmation. The true impact of this moment didn't come from the back and forth. It began with Phillips's opening line. Deceptively simple, but strategically loaded. Can you explain exactly what this 22 billion pound black hole is? His delivery was calm, almost surgical, but the intent behind it was crystal clear. A sharp challenge to the very foundation of Reeves's economic argument. And what followed wasn't just a minor stumble. It was the slow disintegration of a carefully crafted message. As Reeves floundered, trying to hold onto her talking points, it became increasingly obvious. The story she was trying to sell wasn't just falling apart, it was collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions.
Was on its way down when you came in. It's actually slightly ticking back up. But the point I really wanted to ask you about is to describe how serious you think it is. The Joseph Rowntree Trust Foundation today predicts a huge fall in living standards by the end of this Parliament.
I reject that.
You think they're just wrong?
I reject that. And the Office of Budget Responsibility will set out their forecast this week. Living standards in the last Parliament were the worst ever on record. The Office of Budget Responsibility forecast in October that living standards would increase at double the rate in this Parliament as they did in the last Parliament. They'll set out their updated numbers this week. But if you look at wages at the moment, wages are rising today at twice the rate of inflation. That is very different from what we saw under the previous government.
But just to be clear, you're saying that you simply don't think that living standards are going to fall. In fact, you're suggesting that they're rising now and they'll continue to rise. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm confident that we will.
Reeves initially positioned herself as the reluctant realist, presenting the staggering £22 billion figure as the unavoidable consequence of fiscal irresponsibility by the previous administration. She played the role of the prudent chancellor, forced to break difficult news to the public. It was as if she were a doctor diagnosing a chronic illness in the economy and insisting that harsh treatment was the only way forward. This was no accident. It was a well-rehearsed act designed to make her austerity-driven policies seem not just reasonable, but absolutely necessary. The tone was serious, the delivery practiced, and the message clear. There is no alternative, but Trevor Phillips wasn't buying it. With years of experience interrogating the powerful, Phillips knew exactly how to approach this. He didn't confront Reeves with bombast or opinionated jabs. He didn't need to. Instead, he took a different, far more effective route. Precision. Phillips calmly referenced official Treasury documents, methodically pointing out that the numbers Reeves had presented didn't align with what her own government had published. It was a surgical move designed to expose the cracks in her argument without raising his voice, but the impact was undeniable. As he spoke, the facade began to crack. What was supposed to be a controlled narrative quickly spiraled into a challenge Reeves couldn't easily dismiss.
Living standards increase during the course of this Parliament. What we've already seen in these last few months of the Labour government is a sustained increase in living standards. Next month, at the beginning of April, people on the national living wage will see a 6.7% increase in their wages, £1,400 more a year. That's only possible because of the stability that we have returned to the economy. And of course, those three cuts in interest rates from the Bank of England mean that mortgage rates are lower than they otherwise would have been. We've got to do more, absolutely, in terms of raising living standards, but this government have already got started in delivering our plan for change.
Well, look,
It was a slow, deliberate dismantling of a political talking point, piece by piece. Trevor Phillips wasn't interested in simply challenging Reeves with general questions. He was methodically holding up her public claims against hard, irrefutable data. And as he did, the contradictions between what she said and what the facts showed grew louder than anything either of them spoke aloud. As Reeves fumbled through her responses, the narrative she had carefully constructed began to crumble. At first, she argued the £22 billion shortfall was tied to day-to-day spending. Then, in a baffling pivot, she suggested it was actually related to capital spending. But the real kicker came moments later, when she seemed to loop back again, as if caught in her own echo chamber of confusion. This wasn't a simple miscommunication. It was something far more alarming. It felt like a startling sign that even the Chancellor herself wasn't entirely sure what financial crisis she was describing. The shifting story wasn't just a slip-up, it was an unraveling of the very foundation she had tried to stand on.
You can say paint the picture you've just painted, but there's a different way of seeing this. Inflation isn't coming down as fast as you hoped it was.
Well, again, the Office of Budget Responsibility will do their forecast.
Well, they'll do that. Well, I'm just never mind the forecast. Let's look at what's happened already. Inflation's not coming down at the rate you hoped it was. Interest rates are being held; they're not coming down. The growth figures are absolutely flat, and per capita growth is actually falling. Are you being a bit complacent about where we are now?
I know that we need to go further and faster in delivering economic growth and seeing public services improve. But there are no shortcuts here. It's the hard yards that are necessary.
But if you want to do people to do the hard yards, you have to convince them, surely, that the situation demands it. And what we're hearing this morning from you, I'm afraid, is one that says, actually, it's kind of okay, don't worry too much.
Things have changed since the general election. We've had cuts in interest rates, not hikes in interest rates, and wages are rising faster than inflation. That was not the case in the previous parliament, which was the worst on record for living standards. But are you saying, do we need to do more to grow the economy, to address the cost of living crisis? Absolutely we do. That is why we are reducing bureaucracy and regulation. It's why we are reforming the pension system to bring more money into the economy.
What made the exchange so gripping wasn't just Reeves's struggle to answer. It was the way she reacted under mounting pressure. Instead of clarifying her points, she backpedaled. Instead of correcting course, she dug in deeper. Each attempt to explain the £22 billion shortfall only served to muddle her position further, revealing a lack of coherence that went beyond a simple lapse in communication. But the real genius of Phillips' strategy lay in its elegance and its restraint. He didn't need to raise his voice or argue. He simply brought her back to her own words and official government reports as she swerved to avoid them. He steered her back when she dodged. He calmly restated the question. It was a masterclass in interrogation. No theatrics, no over-the-top rhetoric, just relentless, focused precision. The result was a rare kind of political moment, one where the interview didn't just expose inconsistencies in a narrative, it revealed something far more unsettling. A deeper fragility in the story that Labour had been pushing. Watching Reeves attempt to untangle her own statements felt like observing someone trying to solve a Rubik's Cube while blindfolded. Frustrating, disorienting, and ultimately futile. Her authority on the issue didn't just waver, it evaporated.
Of the situation we're in is you, and how much is the past? You routinely blame the Tories for the situation you're in, but business leaders routinely say that it was your pessimistic messages in the autumn that discouraged spending, your national insurance rise that halted hiring and depressed the economy. Honestly, looking back at it now, did you overdo the doom and gloom?
When I became Chancellor, we did inherit a £22 billion black hole in the public finances.
Not
I had to take,
but anyway.
Well, the OBR set out that in the numbers they published last year. We have addressed that. It did require difficult decisions, particularly in terms of tax.
But that's not what I'm asking about. The message you were giving, and the Prime Minister, through the autumn was, it's terrible, it's awful, we have to do all sorts of things. Did you overdo the pessimism?
No, we took the action that was necessary to ensure that our public services and public finances were on a firm footing. And the tax, the national insurance, the non-dom tax,
As the interview progressed, the inconsistencies in Reeves's arguments and didn't just appear, they became a pattern, a recurring thread woven throughout her responses. But the most telling moment came when Trevor Phillips introduced a report from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, one of the UK's most respected organizations in the field of poverty and social inequality. The report painted a bleak picture: rising poverty levels, stagnant wages, and millions of families struggling to make ends meet. It was a direct contradiction to the narrative Reeves had been presenting, and yet, instead of engaging with the report's findings with data or counter-arguments, she dismissed it outright. No rebuttal, no evidence, just a blanket rejection. This wasn't just a case of bad optics. It raised a far more fundamental question. How was economic policy actually being shaped? Was Reeves genuinely engaging with all the facts, or was she simply cherry-picking the data that supported her political agenda? Her blatant disregard for one of the UK's most credible social research bodies suggested the latter. What Phillips had managed to expose wasn't just a gap in her argument. It painted the picture of a chancellor who didn't necessarily work with economic realities, but with economic convenience. A leader who crafts a narrative first, then hunts for numbers to back it up later. If the interview hadn't already shaken public trust, the headlines that followed only deepened the cracks. Just as Reeves was advocating for national belt tightening, calling for spending cuts and shared sacrifice, reports emerged that she had recently attended a VIP concert at the O2 Arena, and it wasn't just any ticket. This was exclusive access, luxury seating, the works. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. A chancellor calling for austerity while living the high life in the lap of luxury. It was a political misstep that not only undermined her credibility, it exposed the hypocrisy at the heart of her narrative.
Is failing. It failed the little girls, and it failed everybody who is actually still at risk.
I mean, it's appalling what happened in Southport and
At a time when ordinary families are struggling to cover heating bills, cut back on groceries, and fear rising mortgage rates, The image of the Chancellor indulging in elite entertainment couldn't have sent a worse message. It wasn't just a case of poor timing, it was a glaring symbol of the disconnect between political rhetoric and personal behavior. The entire situation began to feel like something straight out of Orwell, an official preaching austerity and sacrifice while privately enjoying the trappings of privilege. For many, it wasn't just tone deaf, it was downright insulting. This moment took Reeves's already shaky economic message and wrapped it in a cloak of hypocrisy. When leaders ask the public to make sacrifices, they must lead by example. But in that moment, Reeves did the complete opposite. The public's trust, already tenuous, began to erode as they saw the Chancellor, who should have been showing solidarity, instead indulging in a lifestyle so far removed from their struggles. As skepticism grew, independent economists began stepping forward to take a closer look at the so-called £22 billion crisis Reeves had used to justify her austerity plans. Their verdict? The numbers didn't hold up under serious scrutiny. What had once been presented as a fiscal inevitability now appeared more like a carefully constructed narrative, one that was crumbling fast under the weight of fact-based analysis.
Haven't actually kicked in yet, they're about to kick in now. Is that going to depress the economy further?
Well, look, the Office of Budget Responsibility will set out their forecast. I recognise that there are costs. Because it's them who do the forecast.
Because you're the Chancellor, and you've mentioned the OBR, I think, now 5 times. Who's running this country? Is it you or the OBR?
I make the policy decisions, but it is right that forecasting is done by someone else. I shouldn't be marking my own homework, and I'm not going to be doing that. Unlike the previous government, I've got respect for those independent economic institutions. But, Trevor, your question is, do tax increases have an impact on the economy? Of course they do. But imagine if I'd have done something else last October. Imagine if I'd have swept the problems under the carpet and said everything was fine. Then today, when we...
Several economic analysts quickly pointed out that what Reeves had presented as an urgent fiscal black hole was, in reality, far more reflective of poor budgeting practices and short-term accounting assumptions. What she portrayed as a catastrophic gap was actually a solvable mismatch, far from an unavoidable emergency. Experts argued that this wasn't a fiscal crisis at all, but a manufactured one, crafted to justify tough measures. Some went even further, warning that Reeves's proposed solutions, namely tax hikes, could actually do more harm than good. Instead of fixing the problem, these policies could stall growth, reduce investment, and place an even heavier burden on working families. In other words, her supposed cure could end up deepening the very economic malaise she claimed to be addressing. This growing expert consensus pointed to a troubling conclusion. Reeves's economic narrative wasn't built on necessity, it was shaped by political expedience. The £22 billion black hole wasn't fiscal, it was strategic. What had started as an awkward interview quickly evolved into something much more serious, a potential revelation of political manipulation. With each new critique from economists and every misstep in communication, the idea began to take hold that the £22 billion figure wasn't a warning, it was a weapon. By framing the economy as teetering on the edge of disaster, Reeves created a sense of urgency, making drastic tax hikes and spending cuts seem not only acceptable, but absolutely essential. It's a classic tactic in politics. Create a problem big enough, and people will tolerate almost any solution. But when the problem itself appears inflated, misrepresented, or even fabricated, public trust begins to erode. The narrative shifts from financial responsibility to sleight of hand, using the illusion of crisis to push through unpopular policies. This wasn't just spin, it was storytelling at the highest level of government. A carefully crafted tale designed to justify political ends, with ordinary citizens expected to bear the cost. Trevor Phillips' interview with Rachel Reeves didn't just highlight a bad media appearance. It pulled back the curtain on something far deeper. It exposed a chancellor who seemed not just disconnected from the data, but actively resistant to scrutiny, and perhaps even willing to manipulate public fear to advance a political agenda. This goes far beyond one shaky interview or a misjudged concert appearance. It strikes at the core of Labour's pitch into the British people, that they are the party of economic credibility, stability, and fairness. But that promise now stands in sharp contrast to Reeves's performance and policy messaging. Voters who once backed Labour in good faith, expecting transparency, competence, and compassion, are beginning to feel betrayed. Instead of a clean break from past political games, They are seeing familiar patterns re-emerge. Hollow statistics, unexplained numbers, and elites enjoying comfort while asking others to sacrifice. According to insider reports, the damage is already beginning to show. Public trust is wavering, and if this scandal continues to snowball, Labour risks alienating the very people who believed in its message of change. In politics, credibility isn't just earned, it's constantly tested. And in that interview, on sitting across from Trevor Phillips, Rachel Reeves may have failed one of the biggest tests yet. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. Like and subscribe to our channel for more updates like this.